So this is Akash's plans for Hyperscaling's GPU providers, and it was just released, and I was so psyched for its contents because there's a lot to be excited about as an AKT holder. But then my friend says the most craziest thing. He says that he doesn't understand most of this. So, okay, it's time for a live dive into exactly why I'm excited about this article from a holder's perspective. So let's start from the top. This is from Greg Osiri, the co-creator of Akash Network, on how exactly they plan to hyperscale up their supply through creative use of incentives. Here it starts off setting the stage, and the stage is pretty simple. Akash's GPUs have recently increased by well over 120% since last quarter, and their utilization rates remain pretty optimal. What's optimal level? We don't really have to guess. Their team has been very public with their targets, and they've been hitting them non-stop. So optimal level is between 50 to 60% utilization on average. Okay, so this is because the demand from Akash's users aren't one and done, but they're proving to be sticking around long term. And that tends to happen when you have a good product, right? So no one's going anywhere, and even if they did want to go, they're free to go, and that's why Akash, right? Moving on, he's saying here that at 70%, this is considered attractive for GPU providers. So don't forget, we're not talking about your home computer graphics card here. These are $250,000 each for a rack of 8 H200s, which is needed to power models like DeepSeek. And these providers, they want their money. They've got electric bills, they've got internet bills to pay, and they're not about the idle life. So Akash having a strong track record of proving high utilization from the start will be key here as a trust point that any provider that wants to put their GPUs on Akash will have them rented out. And this reputation is how we want Akash to be known for. You need your GPUs rented at 70%? Get on Akash. And this is extremely important. This is very key because the market today is flooded with incentives, and that makes it easy to believe that these GPUs are practically free. They're selling for $2 an hour while costing $30,000 a piece. And every DePIN is incentivizing in some way. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to convince people who own these $250,000 setups to put their stuff on your network. So there's no free lunch, and like I said, they're not about the idle life. So with Akash, everything is transparent, so we can actually see what Akash pays. So here is the details for PIP2 proposal, and you'll see here that they pay $5.75 to providers only to charge $2.30 an hour to the customers. So this is the incentive at work. And this is how it all works. So when I say that utilization is important, this is what I mean, because all of this would be paid 100% by incentives if no one rents the GPUs out, right? Because, they're paying for the incentives. And so why do I care if it's paid by incentives? I care because incentives aren't magic internet money. It's money given away in the form of a service or even straight monetary value from the project's treasury straight into the users in the wild. So this money transfer, this value transfer isn't magic. It comes from somewhere. And in 99% of the cases, it comes from holders like myself. So we buy the token at, say, $10, and that value is taken and given to another user in the form of subsidies or incentives. So the more incentives that Akash gives away, the more they have to give away AKT, which adds additional sell pressure to my favorite crypto, right? But once all of these incentives are through in the market and there are no more incentives left, because that day will come, the only incentive left for providers will be to go where their assets get rented, and they rent out on Akash. So back to this paragraph. Greg is reminding us here that Akash has not shot his shot yet. Everyone was talking about Akash's GPU count being lower than others. Everybody's flexing their incentive spending on massive GPU counts that they don't rent out. And here Greg reminds us that Akash has simply spent only 2 provider incentive pilots. So pilots, right? So in other words, they still have more incentives on board. They still have more incentives to onboard more GPUs. And this is where it starts to get exciting, right? So utilization guarantee incentives. So this to me is the most exciting part of the incentive design here. Incentives are necessary, but one more time, they're not free. So it's very good to see Akash take a nuanced approach to giving away holders' value in order to incentivize growth. Incentives aren't infinite and they will run out. So being smart with the money will never be a bad thing. So Greg says that most DePINs will simply pay for the compute provided, and it creates extreme waste with low utilization. So what does this mean? Well, let's think about our friends at IO and their incentive program that provides block rewards to their GPU providers being on a network. What are block rewards? Let's take a look. So block rewards is basically coin emissions. And so let's see, check out their docs. So block rewards are payments made to suppliers who provide CPUs and GPUs to the network. And these incentives, their supply growth, yes, and the rewards accrue hourly in IO following a emission schedule, right? And then, so there you have it. So after you KYC and stake your minimum IO to join this program, you will receive IO incentives so long as your GPUs are connected, even if they don't rent out. So here you'll see that certain higher end GPUs earn more block rewards than others, and that's how they incentivize their providers. So H100 has a 10x multiplier. Good, that makes sense. So in this incentive design, IO pays out 100% of the provider's time because in order to earn, they must be present. Akash, on the other hand, is making a promise here to both the providers and the holders of AKT, which is that the utilization of the assets you brought to Akash will be high. Akash's incentive program will have users directly pay most of the provider's income instead of having Akash covering all of the costs. Now, this is a genius idea because it should stave off a constant need of AKT incentives going out and affecting the price. When a direct user buys AKT and uses it for compute, it's part of what I call the tenant-provider loop. Now, this is a renewable loop because the user will continue to buy more AKT to continue to feed to providers in order to continue receiving the compute from the providers, right? So this is the reason why this design won't use the incentive pool as much as the other type of payment. And this is because it's renewable. And this is proven by Akash's track record of keeping these utilizations high in the first place. Compare this to PIP1 and PIP2, which saw a large outflow from our community fund, $15 million worth, to be exact, of AKT sold to bring the first GPUs online. Then pays back the incentives spent over time with its utilization. Basically, as Akash rents it out, it pays back the incentive fund, right? So this isn't tomato, because the timing does matter. The pips have not been good for the price action, suppressing the price as they need to convert community funds into fiat to onboard the GPUs. With the utilization guarantee, we will sell AKT incentives in smaller amounts and over a longer period of time, leading to a more stable price action for AKT. Akash can keep their incentives close to the chest so that the community has choices. Do we incentivize for longer than other markets for an advantage, or do we pocket the savings as profit, right? So it's good to have choices rather than spend it all up front before demand is even determined yet, right? Could you imagine if Akash spent all of their incentives to have 30,000 GPUs only to not rent out most of them and pay for all of them all of the time? Akash deserves more recognition for both its technology and the effective network management by its contributors. This is masterclass. I'm truly happy with this as a holder. So moving on to the next point, we have what I call serve to own GPUs, which is a pretty creative idea combining many concepts, which Greg wants to coin. What do you call it? He wanted to coin it serve to own, is going to coin it as DeFi, DAI, and DePIN. DeFi pin. Okay? DeFi pin. I hope it catches on. So now they're trying to solve three birds with one stone, structuring a product that will give money to companies that want to own their own GPUs for their own operations, but perhaps they can't afford the 250,000 for a set of H200s to run DeepSeek, right? So it'll decentralize Akash's GPUs more, as not all H200s will come from only the data centers, but also from small companies from all over. Oh, and it's also serve to own, so these will all be dependable by outside contract to serve Akash and not like say move to another DePIN, right? So think about this for a second. Recently, DeepSeek released and changed the game because its open source reasoning is a very capable model for a lot less compute, right, than previously thought that was required for such reasoning capabilities. So this moved the game from model makers down to the application level. So I want to show you a clip here. Here's Vincent, CEO of Prime Intellect, to explain that. Someone smarter than me, right? So here we go.
Like actually in this direction, I think people quickly realizing that basically like the app layer might be where like a lot of the value will be unlocked. And it's really, I think, a mix of like distribution, like unlocking the different use cases. But I think more and more what we'll see this year, right, is like as we move from chatbots to reasoners and now are moving to agents this year, like I think there will be basically a lot of challenge almost like in deploying this to extremely valuable use cases, right? Like one example being if you can autonomously run like a startup, like there's basically a bunch of like work that I think needs to be done beyond just the model. But I think there's different layers to this where I think there's also like a lot of the value will go to the compute layer.
Okay, so you've got the potential here for the first developers into this AI utility, breaking out new use cases. And there's only one small $250,000 problem, right? So looks like DeFi PIN may not be a bad idea to get your private access for free in exchange for service. And then after the GPUs are paid off, providers can keep on being service providers and earn for themselves instead. And I think that funnel checks out for me. So here the next 2 points are more exciting for actual providers, and this is about quality of life improvements for the providers. For holders, the only thing you need to know is that Akash needs to attract both demand from the tenants and supply from the providers. So having the best provider experience over the next DePIN just makes it that much easier to provide for Akash. So here, so let's see. D, that's C, having a new provider suite, provider console. So D is just telling us where Akash sources these GPUs from. And Greg is telling us that there are a lot more to onboard if we're willing to pay for it. Super logical, makes a lot of sense. So here's the last point. The last point is a promise for something yet to be released, and that's Akash's managed service economy. So under the roadmap, it was due, I want to say it was due Q1 of next year, right here, Q1 of 2026, but Greg is moving it up to the end of this year, I guess. So this is about managed backend services for tenants and making their life easier and, of course, charging fees for those services, right? So since it's so hard to predict what Akash is going to do, I don't know what they're going to do in the future, let's examine AWS's current managed offerings for some insights into what it is that we're looking at here, right? So, all right, here we go. So why managed services? Let's watch this clip to see how a real client might use managed services.
Our challenge initially with the cloud was that all of our systems were hosted in the data center and our teams were organized around managing data center infrastructure. Migrating to the cloud required us to level up our internal staff and migrate workloads. AMS and AWS support have helped us every step of the way on our cloud journey. AWS managed services handled operational tasks while our teams focused on migrating additional workloads. AMS helped manage our workloads after they were migrated to AWS and focused on backups and allowed our team to work on migrating additional services out to AWS. AWS Enterprise Support and our account team all work together with our internal teams to manage our infrastructure. In the first year, we migrated about 80% of our workload to AWS. For new workloads, AWS helps us deploy them within days or weeks instead of months and years. But we're still exploring using AMS for additional services, including patching. One of the things that I really liked about working with AMS is that it allowed my internal teams to work with experts in the cloud and kind of adapt some of that culture. AWS and WaFd Bank are both really focused on our customers. Building on AWS gives us the elasticity and scale to build new applications for our customers.
Okay, not bad. So this managed services, in this case, handled operational tasks, manage and help deploy workloads, and operational best practices like backups, allowing new teams to work with experts and learn from the very best. So a permissionless marketplace, what managed services permissionless marketplace would probably allow service providers to offer their services directly and build closer relationships with the tenants that are using their server, right? Bigger spends between the tenant and the provider would mean larger fees collected by Akash as well, so everybody wins here. Can't talk much more about this point because the proof is not yet in the pudding. But if it's anything like the start of the GPU marketplace, it could bring about the next stage of parabolic growth that every holder with conviction wants to see. And what does that look like? You just have to take a look at this chart here about the available daily fees here, which is in red. And you can see after September, which is when the GPU market opened up, shortly after, you can see this parabolic move up north, and it has not come down since. So like I said, if this is the next stage, you cannot wait to see this managed services marketplace come about. And that's it. That's the whole thread on, from a holder's perspective, on why we should be excited, especially if you're an AKT holder, and why you should strap in because we're going to the moon. See you next time.